need to actually step out. You're not going to hurt any of our feelings, but it is for 30 minutes. And then also I want to check out with you all who is currently living on their own now. All right, sweet. Who is thinking about or in the process of living on their own? Right here, yeah. Who's just fine with staying at mom and dad's house? I want to go back. No, I don't actually. That's a terrible place. It's a good thing you're in here because you have some experience here between the two of us. I'm 29 years old. I've lived on my own for quite some time. I've lived all around Colorado Springs. I've lived down south. I've also lived out east. I've lived up north. I've lived with people. I've lived without people. Without people, so great. And Odyssey has some experience too.
Yeah, I've lived on my own for quite some time. But I actually have two 20-something-year-old children, and we have just recently gone through getting them out of the house and everything that it takes to get to that point. So, yeah, really sharing our knowledge.
Sharing some of it. Before we get going and starting to share some of that knowledge, you all have pens and those little sticky notepad little things. So here's what we want to do. First, we're going to take 15 seconds, and I want you all to write down some things that you feel like you may need to be considering when moving out. So if you've already moved out, some things that you consider. So write down, we're going to take 15 seconds starting now. That's time. That's the only amount of time you'll ever have to think about things for moving out. Do you realize that? 15 seconds. So hopefully you did a good job. No, I'm kidding. You'll have more time, right? And we'll talk about those, and we'll actually get back to those here in a second. So let's now delve into what it takes to living on your own.
So where do you start, right? Most definitely you want to have money in savings already. So if you haven't started saving, now's a good time to start saving. There's a lot of front-end expenses, one-time moving expenses. We'll talk more in a minute about what those look like. But you need to have money in savings to cover those moving expenses. We also want you to consider building a budget. So when you work with a budget, that means you're paying attention to how much money you're bringing in and how much money you are spending. If and when you decide to build a budget to move out, definitely include all of the one-time moving expenses so you can get a big picture view of everything that it's going to take to move out. But we have a fantastic spending tool. If you are an Ent member and you utilize our online banking through Ent.com, you can log into the online banking and go to the Money Insight tab, and there's a spending tool. If you are not an Ent member, we have a non-member app. It's called Money Insight Lite. We have mobile banking experts downstairs in Burger Hall that can help you download that free app and get you in. And so what we'd like for you to do is access the spending tool, and basically it will categorize all of your spending. So you can really take a look and see where's my money going, right, when I spend my money. And so this is an example of a budget using a spending tool. Typically you want to spend about 30% of your income on housing, about 15% of your income on food. You might find when you utilize the spending tool that you're probably spending about 50% of your income on food, right? You don't care, we're hungry, we eat, you don't care how much we're spending. But when you see that, you know that you're spending 50% of your income on food, that's a great spot to think, okay, I need to give myself a food allowance. Let me cut that down to 15%, and then you'll have extra money that you can put towards housing. Because as we'll see in just a moment, housing costs a lot, and that really is your determining factor on whether or not you can live on your own.
So speaking of housing, you want to start thinking about, can you afford that 30%, that much that should be going towards housing with the amount that you're making now? So when you think about housing, it's not just rent, by the way. Housing is rent, utilities, home insurance, all that goes into play when it comes to rent. So when we're talking about 30%, you can actually take your monthly earned income. So for those who are gainfully employed, do something for me really fast. You all have cell phones on you, yes? Pull out your cell phone, ignore that text from Stacy who's telling you that Ent's here and she's super excited about it, like, oh my God. So take that phone out, ignore that text, and pull out your calculator and take how much you make a month. And if you're trying to figure that out, you get paid weekly times that by 4. Then you got your monthly, you get paid bi-weekly, you take that amount times by 2, get that amount, and then times it by that 0.3, which is 30%, and then see how much monthly housing expenses that you can afford at this moment. I'll give you a second on that. So with that in mind, if you're looking at that amount, you may be thinking, I don't know if that's so much that can actually will allow me to afford living on my own. Roughly about $1,200 is how much it's going to cost for everybody to live on their own. That's with rent and everything else involved. So you have to think about a lot goes into that. And then on top of that, that's just housing. There's other things that apply as well. And we'll actually take a second to look at what all goes into that. We'll play a video. Assume I'm forgetting something? No. We're watching a video.
All right, we're doing it.
Yes. That's going to tell you everything that goes involved with living on your own.
I was like, well, you have a birthday party every single year. Of course my hypothetical housewarming party would take priority.
Yeah, sure.
Hold on. What is this?
Oh, I've seen this before. Actually, Jen, since you're thinking of getting your own place, you should probably play it.
What do you do?
Well, common apartment expenses pop up here, and you pay them by racking them with this mallet.
That sounds awesome. There's so many.
We'll see. It starts off pretty easy with rent.
Piece of cake.
You have to keep track of utilities and things like cable and internet too.
I get it. Regular budget stuff. This is so easy.
Good, because this is still the practice mode. The actual moving into an apartment mode starts now.
What is all this stuff?
There's your security deposit and first and last month's rent, since some landlords ask for that. Sometimes a credit or background check is required, and you need to pay for those too. There's a pet deposit, and you can't forget that parking stalls sometimes have an extra fee. Then there's association fees for certain apartment buildings. Oh, and renter's insurance. And that's not counting moving expenses. Moving companies or truck rental or a pizza budget for friends helping out, packing materials like boxes and tape, and the bare necessities of apartment setup like toilet paper, light bulbs, cleaning supplies, utensils, a first aid kit, a toolkit, and we haven't even gotten to furniture yet.
Futon.
Well, you missed your pet deposit and your electricity bill, so you'd be living in the dark and you wouldn't have your cat. And judging by your score, it looks like you need to have a lot more than just a couple months rent saved up before you make the move.
Why is it doing that?
It's a new month, so some of the expenses from that last round are going to pop up again.
So when does this game actually end?
Oh, Jen, it never ends.
Very serious. I think my favorite part of that is when that girl goes to see what the game is, she enters the dark realm and comes up on the other side. I don't really know what that was about. She's like, what is this video game? I'm like, where'd you go for a brief second? But you can see, right, she racked a lot of bills on there. And if you think back to some of the things you wrote down, or even what was just rattling through your head as you were thinking in those quick 15 seconds, probably missed some things, right? Some things that you probably didn't really think about when it comes to living on your own. So, that in mind, let's think about some things to consider. So the very first thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a qualifying credit score? So you may not have realized that when you go to rent an apartment or a house, a lot of times they do a credit check. And so you either have to have a good score or somebody that you're renting with that has a good score. Does anybody know right now if you've started establishing credit or do you have a good credit score? So, yeah. Well, you're in luck. After you leave here, if you just go straight across the hall, there's another micro session right across the hall about your credit score. 30-minute session just on tips and tricks on how to start establishing credit, building credit, and maintaining credit. We also have credit counselors downstairs in Burger Hall. So once you find your way back downstairs, you are able to look at your credit report and credit score for free, and then sit down with a credit counselor, and they can talk through everything that you're looking at and kind of help you explain what's going on there.
Some other things that we could think of, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Nope, you're good.
Is also increasing your income. When we talked about before, when we looked at the amount that you made per month, and we were seeing if that accounted for how much you could actually afford, for housing, you could think of some things like maybe I want to increase my income, I want to get a second job, or maybe I could get a roommate, right? And I could halve that amount. And so now, yeah, that was $1,200 for housing, but if I get a roommate, I can half that. But there's some things to consider whenever you think about getting another job or getting a roommate, right? If you are getting another job, well, you have time for that, right? Can you actually afford to, or can you actually give your time to have two different jobs? Or if you're considering roommates, trustworthiness. Right? Is that person someone you can really, really trust? Because maybe halfway through living with you, they decide, you know what, this whole living on my own thing doesn't work. I'm going back to where I can now live for free, and now you're stuck with a place that you probably can't even afford. Or maybe they are very dirty people. They're really great people when they hang out with you and they go out to the club and they're looking real fresh then, but then at home, it's a totally different story, and that's not fun. Some other things you want to think about as well is like maybe they have significant others. Roommates bringing their boyfriend or girlfriend around, and they're using your shower, and you're like, excuse me, are they paying for utilities? That's a whole other shower I could have had that maybe I can't take now, right? So you want to be thinking about things like that whenever it comes to increasing your income and roommates as well.
Another thing to consider is, the question there is a view worth extra cost, and maybe a view doesn't do it for you, right? But maybe you want a gym where you live, or a pool, or you want to bring your pet to where you go to rent. All of those things cost extra. And so it's really about identifying wants versus needs, right? What do you actually need versus what do you want? I know living at home with your parents, you've got everything that you want, right? You're living the good life. But just know that they have worked hard and built up all of those wants throughout the years. So don't be alarmed when if you decide to move out on your own, you got to start from the very basic, right? So maybe a view or a pool is nice, but you can't afford it, so you'll work yourself up to that.
You also want to think about the size of the place that you're going to be living in. If you have a lot of furniture. If you do have a roommate, are they going to bring furniture? Those could be some things to consider. Maybe you have to give furniture away. Or maybe you actually have to have a separate storage space, and that could end up costing you extra money. So also want to think about that when it comes to space.
When it comes to reducing costs, so you saw on your phone, right, how much you can afford in housing, and that's not a lot. If you are specific about where you choose to live, that could reduce other costs. So for example, if you pick to live close to where either you go to school or work, then you can bike to work, right, or walk to work. And so that reduces the cost for gas, wear and tear on your vehicle, oil change, tires, things of that nature. If family and friends are really important to you and you know that you'll be constantly driving to go see them, pick a place to live that's close to there so that you don't have to spend a lot in gas. Also, if you live close to mom, you just always go home and eat her food. That really helps with that 15% budget on the food there. So.
And with that in mind, when we talk about reducing costs and moving, that kind of delves into now when you're thinking about rental pricing, because an area of town could really affect that, right? There's maybe you've heard stories that like living down south, you're like, yeah, it's a lot cheaper down there, so that's going to save me on rent, right? But to that point, I've also maybe heard that it's unsafe downtown. Now I've lived downtown, I've lived down south, it's not unsafe down there, but maybe that's something that's in your mind, and so mentally you're like, I just don't feel safe in that neighborhood. So you do want to come up a little bit more north, but that's going to cost you a little bit more money as you live more north. So even though maybe living next to mom is going to give you that 15% food allowance, but living in that area, she's worked her way to get up there, right? So you have to be thinking about that. So you have to kind of weigh out the pros and cons. Are you okay living in somewhere a little bit cheaper that maybe you don't feel like is all that safe? But maybe you have friends and family around that area, right? So that is a really good thing to think about, especially when it comes to rental pricing.
Also things to consider are, do you want to live in a house or an apartment? So if you live in a house, you have the opportunity to have more roommates, right, which allows your rental or your housing costs to be cut. If you live in a house with 4 other people, you're dividing everything by 5, right? The thing with living in a house though is there's a lot more, your bills are a little bit more, there's a lot more upkeep, so you have to mow the grass, you've got to rake the leaves, you've got to put the trash out to the curb every Friday. It's a lot more private. Living in apartments, you're going to have people living on either side of you, above you, below you. You can have a roommate in an apartment as well, but typically 1 or 2 people. If you throw some bunk beds in there, maybe another person can slide in there. But yeah, it's just about, you know, how many roommates do you want, what you can afford. There's also HOA dues that you have to take into consideration. Does anybody know what we mean by HOA?
Yeah, HOA is basically, they pay you, they have their own set of rules you have to follow for the housing area, and you have to pay monthly for that as well. But they actually have to keep your neighbors doing the same things, so like don't put the trash out in front, take it back after your trash day comes or something like that, just to keep it nice and clean so the property value goes up.
Yeah. Did you want to come on? That was perfect.
So,
That was awesome.
we're done.
Yeah. I'll just grab a seat. That was great. Yeah, so HOA dues cost more money, and they do set rules and guidelines. And so when my son moved out, he moved into a house with 3 other guys, so it was the 4 of them in a house. And one of the HOA rules was they couldn't park on the street. So they did have a double car garage, but there's 4 people, right? So 2 people were in the garage, and then the 2 people were parked right behind them. Every time somebody needed to go to school or to work, everybody had to get up, go out, move the car around so that people could back out and then park. A lot of times they would just park down the street at the local park and then walk back because they just get tired of constantly moving their vehicles. They weren't really good at keeping the lawn clean or mowed. They would never remember to bring their trash can back. So ultimately, 3 strikes and you're out. They actually got evicted from their house because they weren't able to keep up with all the rules and guidelines. Let's face it, when you move out, you're trying to get away from rules, right? From your parents, you want to do what you want when you want. So just words of wise, if you are looking for a place to live, maybe not find a place that has an HOA, unless you're okay with rules.
So then once you've decided, right, you're like, okay, I know I have enough, I can afford housing, living on my own, maybe I even have a roommate, I know these things to consider where I want to go. It's also really important that once you actually start going out and doing your property hunting, that you stay safe. And what do you think we mean by that? Yes?
Having people come with you when you're going to look at open houses.
Yeah, definitely. Have somebody go along with you. What else? Okay, I'll help you out with that. Exactly, well, that's the very first one, so that's awesome. Bring a friend or tell someone where you're going, right? That's like the big thing. That way, like there's scammers out there, there's just dangerous people out there, so at least let somebody know where you're going to be, so that way when they're talking to the police later on, when you've gone missing, they know a date and a time. No, that's really dark. So, right on camera too. So another thing that you want to do is investigate the neighborhood as well. That's a big thing. At one point I was out looking for an apartment and I saw the price. I'm like, wow, that's really cheap. And it's actually not that bad of a neighborhood, so let me stop by. I drove past it and it just happened to be that little part of the neighborhood that maybe people are not always so proud of. And I was like, I think I've actually seen the street at nighttime and it was extremely scary. Not a place that I want to live. So investigate that neighborhood and not just go in the daytime, but also stop by at night, right? Just see what all times of the day looks like. You also want to meet the landlord. I had a duplex that I lived in at one time, and we met the landlord, and she seemed like a really nice lady, but we just saw so much of her that it was like, I wish I would have known that if I was going to see this much of her, I don't want to see her anymore. She was just hanging around the entire time. But if you get like an odd feeling about the landlord, or just get an odd vibe, maybe that's not somewhere that you want to stay. Because that's a person that you sort of have now like an open contract with, so you want to get to know them. As well as you want to look around. If they offer like an actual walk around, then go. And I would say if they don't, then don't go. So that's the big thing. But if you're going around, open up doors and open things up. I remember I had a walkthrough one time. I opened up a closet and the whole closet door fell off, and I was like, whoa. And the guy was like, I gotta fix that. I'm like, this is not looking good. So just make sure you're looking around. And then always, don't just go to the very first place. Don't just say, hey, this is so great, because you're so excited about moving out that you want to get to your very first place. Take time, right? Know what to compare, right? Compare all the different places. And at the end of the day, just go with your gut. If something doesn't feel right, then don't go with it. Definitely, that's the biggest thing there. Anything on that one? That's it, right?
It seems like a lot already. So.
We're ready to go? I'm so ready to move out.
Yeah, it's not happening yet though.
Oh, okay. So some
One
things
more
to
thing.
consider too.
Yes.
Huh? Okay.
The lease, right? So that's the contract that you're going to sign between you and whoever you're renting the property from. Very important to read the lease. Even if it's in really tiny print, even if it's 20 pages long, you want to read every word of the lease. There's a lot of stipulations that they'll put in there. For example, Zach, summertime,
Yeah.
wanting to grill out.
You gotta have ribs. I couldn't even have a charcoal grill, and I did not read that. And then I got a charcoal grill, and then I got a note on my door, and there was no more ribs. So not only did I miss out on having ribs, and I had already had some, it was a whole thing. It was terrible.
In the lease, it will talk about what happens if you have to leave or break the lease early. So if you sign a year lease, you're 9 months in, and for some reason you need to move somewhere else. There are costs to that, so you could have to pay a very large upfront fee for that, or they might just say, you know what, you signed your lease, you still owe those other 3 months worth of rent. So it's good to know that going in. Know the guest and pet policy. I once lived in an apartment that had a stipulation that if I had somebody staying at my place for more than 5 days, then they were then considered a resident, and I had to add them to the lease, and then my rent was going to go up. Pet policies, a lot of places around town, really pay attention to the breed of dog that you have. If you have a dog, the size of the dog, they'll have barking stipulations in there. They'll talk about, what happens if your pet causes damage. All of that will be in the lease, very important to read. Knowing how emergency repairs are handled. I remember when we were shopping with my son, in the lease, it actually said that he would be responsible for the first $100 of repair costs. And we were like, well, that doesn't seem right. I mean, he's moving into an apartment so that he doesn't have to pay for repair costs. So just little things like that you really want to pay attention and understand as you're moving through that contract.
Yeah, and you also want to ask how often the rent goes up, and maybe even get that in writing. In the apartment I'm in currently right now, I asked them. They said, oh, no, not at all, really. It's very rare that it happens. And then the first time I re-upped my lease, it went up $100. So make sure you're asking those questions. And then also, if you're new to the area, you might even think about possibly getting a licensed real estate agent, like that can protect you from scams and maybe looking at some things. But just know that that's going to be an extra cost. But that may help you in the long run, so you don't end up in a messy situation. So once you've done that, now it's time, right? We can sign the lease.
Sign it on the dotted
And
line.
it's on the dotted line now. And guess what? We have a place. It's really awesome. And we're all living in the same place. Did you know that? That's what we just signed up for. We're all roommates. Nobody? You're okay with it? Okay, cool. So good. So this is what's going to happen now. Once we actually start getting into an apartment, there are one-time expenses that you have to think about as you start moving into this huge life event of moving into a new place. And the list is there, but we want to just throw it out to you all. How much do you think up front you would need to actually have saved up moving into a place? Because you can't just one day up and be in a place, right? You probably have to have some money saved up first. How much do you think that you would need?
5,000.
$5,000? Okay. Anything else? Anybody else? 2,000? All right. Well, I was going to go with 5, but I guess we're going with 2.
Yeah.
So we got 2,000. So let's do some math then.
And for the sake of this scenario, we're going to use the seeing that we have decided to go with an apartment, so we're renting an apartment. We have a roommate, so everything is going to be cut in half as far as cost is concerned, and our rent is $1,000 a month. Okay?
Perfect. Yeah. So with that in mind, a lot of times whenever you go to get into an apartment, they ask for a first and then a last month's rent. Why do you think they ask for a last month's rent? Just in case you end up leaving early, right? If you end up skipping out, that way they at least have that money up front. So a lot of times if in our scenario, right, we're living with a person, so we have our $1,000 rent, so half of that for first month is $500, but we gotta pay $500 up front, or for last month up front as well, So now we're down to $1,000. A lot of places will ask for a deposit, just in case you end up, ripping something up, breaking something, or destroying something. So that way, that deposit's there. You may get it back at the end. A lot of times they do half of that month's rent as well. So we're going to pay that, half of that. 1,000 is 500. We're down to 500. Places will actually charge you for a background check and a credit check as well. So a lot of times that's anywhere from $50 to $100. When we in our apartment that we're all going to be living in together, they said, oh, the background check and the credit check is going to be $50. So okay, now we're down to $450. Moving expenses, right? You have a lot of stuff, so maybe you need to get a U-Haul truck, or maybe you can then say, hey, I got a really good friend. He's got a really big truck, and he's going to help me. And I just got to give them pizza and root beer. That's it. And so, to that point though, either way, we're going to be coming out of pocket because we got to buy the pizza and the root beer. So we spend $50 on that. So all that went, and plus gas too. We had to pay for gas too. We didn't just spend $50 on pizza. And then there's furniture. We're not going to pay for furniture here. How about that? What are some ways that we could not pay for furniture? Mom and Dad hook us up with some furniture. What else? Goodwill, definitely. So let's just say we did that. So we're not going to pay for any furniture. We're also going to buy some lifetime supply of toilet paper a little bit later. We're going to use that as furniture, and that'll come up. But we also need internet though. You think so, right? So we definitely need to get a router or a modem. You can either rent routers or modems, and it's like a price every single month, or you can buy it one time up front. That ended up equaling $100 when we bought that router up front because we wanted it to be a little bit faster because we're somewhat of gamers. And so, to that point, right, we need a faster bandwidth. And then all these things came up: a broom, a mop, vacuum, dishes, towels, bed sheets. Towels and bed sheets, we just got it from home. Sound good? But all these other things, though, especially a vacuum, we had to get a pretty good vacuum because I hate bad vacuums. And you're living with me now, so too bad. So that ended up all together equal to $150. So now we have $150 to spend to ourselves. Yes. What are we going to do with it?
Furniture.
How about style? Just some furniture. Normally they say food. So cool. Or you can save, or food, or it could go back into our ratio, right? It could go back into everything else that we need. Perfect. We made it. Yes. That's it, possibly? No. Spent that one time.
Just like those whack-a bills, it just keeps coming, right? So monthly expenses, these are things that you will be paying on a monthly basis, utilities and trash. Keeping in mind, again, if you move into a house, your utility and trash bill will be a lot more than it would be in an apartment. Cell phone and internet. Maybe your parents are cool and they'll let you stay on their cell phone plan so you don't have to pay for that hefty bill. Maybe they're not though, and so then you have options, right? You get the basic plan, maybe you go with a prepaid plan. Internet, are you a gamer? Do you need that high-speed internet, or are you okay with paying less money but getting not as fast a speed? Renter's insurance, a lot of places that you rent actually require that. Usually costs about $15 to $20 a month, and what that does is it covers any damage or wear and tear on your personal property, any theft, anything like that. HOA dues, we already talked about that. Sometimes you have to pay for parking. So if you have a parking garage where you have to park in, usually there's an extra cost there. If you want to park undercover so that all that hail that comes into Colorado doesn't damage your car, that could cost money as well. Household items is a monthly expense, but Zach has got a great remedy for that.
Costco. Just get a Costco membership. $60 a month or a year, and then you're good. And then you can buy a lifetime supply of toilet paper, laundry detergent, cleaning supplies, and then we can use them as furniture. And we're good. Got it all down. And plus, if you like frozen food, I don't. But if you do, then definitely buy a bunch of food there and stock up the fridge. Ooh, that's our time. So with all that said, right, we've talked about a lot of things, right? We've talked about saving and credit, things to consider. So what questions do you have?
None?